Hi everyone, my name is Ivan Cruz, and for this presentation, I am analyzing the Paranormal podcast. Specifically, I am analyzing three episodes that all feature the same guest, which is Christian Valerio, and I chose these three because they connect like a mini arc. First, the first one builds the guest background and credibility, while the second moves into celebrity and success claims, and ultimately the third escalates where the conversation shifts towards more extreme and taboo themes. In the end, Christian Valerio is also a really interesting and sought after guest, and every time he shows up on a podcast, he leaves the listener with a mix of suspicion and insider information. Like you're hearing something you're normally not supposed to hear. This is just going to be a quick little roadmap and for our presentation. First, I'll explain what the podcast is about. Then we'll go into why I chose it, who the host is, the history and the audience, how it's marketed and received, and then I'll finally break it down the three episodes, and I'll talk about the editing and whether I use the show as a model. Thank you. Oh, shit. So let's get started. What is Paranormal Podcast about? Paranormal Podcast is a Spanish podcast that presents itself like a weekly investigation into paranormal and non-human topics. And a lot of these themes are especially common and culturally relevant in Latin America, where stories about entities, spiritual practices, and unexplained experiences are already part of everyday conversation for many people. Furthermore, it covers things like entities, rituals, exorcisms, celebrities in power, as well as taboos and secrets. But one thing that really makes it stand out is the tone. It doesn't really feel like someone is casually telling ghost stories. It feels more like a case where you're being guided through all the information. And at the end of the day, most people don't really talk about stuff like this. So let's get started on why I chose these episodes. First, I chose these three episodes for two main reasons. First, they're a strong example of how paranormal podcast keeps attention through tone, pacing, and escalation, even though it's just a long-winded conversation. And secondly, this topic is a little bit personal to me. For example, my uncle is a priest in the Yoruba religion, so topics like spiritual practices and rituals have always been something I've been interested in. Because of that, these episodes really stood out to me, and I really wanted to analyze how these shows presents these ideas, and how it keeps the listener engaged. So let's dive a little bit into the host and the production role. The host is Feppo, whose full name is Felipe Arellano. He isn't just a person asking the questions, he's the entire creator behind the whole podcast as well as the paranormal brand. With a little bit of research, his public information says that he's always been interested in the unexplained and supernatural phenomena since he was young, and he's spent years studying paranormal and non-human topics. In addition, he's also recognized in Mexico as a major communicator of paranormal and UFO related content, and he's built credibility by collaborating with well-known figures in the Spanish language paranormal media. So in these episodes, Feppel's role is basically to act like the guide. He controls the pacing, frames the guest claims as serious, and keeps the conversation feeling like an investigation instead of just random small talk. So let's dive into history and the audience. First, the Paranormal Podcast has grown into a major channel and podcast brand with a large archive and a strong identity. It's not just one weekly upload. On the other hand, it feels like a whole ecosystem built around paranormal content, long episodes, and audience engagement. The size of the catalog and how consistently the show publishes tells you it's built for long term growth and repeated listening. You could also see that it operates more like a network rather than a single show because it mixes different formats. For example, they have full episodes, live stream content, themed segments, so there's always something to watch even between the major releases. This variety helps the brand stay active and keeps the audience in a routine of coming back throughout the whole week, not just once. And over time, the archive becomes a bingeable library So new viewers don't just watch one episode, they get pulled into a backlog and a community conversation. It's already happening. Already happening, yes. Yes, we know it's very electric. The audience is people who enjoy paranormal content, but especially people who want it presented with a serious investigative tone instead of just like casual scary stories around like the campfire. It pulls in listeners who are interested in spiritual practices, taboo mysteries, folklore, and long form deep dives where the host and guests really unpack the topic over time. It also attracts people who like being involved, commenting, debating, sharing clips or theories. And another big part of this audience is people who don't fully believe in everything, but they still stay because it's intense and dramatic. And overall, it just feels like a community space where everyone is trying to make sense of the mystery together. So let's get started with the marketing and reception. The marketing for paranormal podcasts is very social media based, and it's designed to catch you really fast, your attention really fast. For example, the titles are built for instant curiosity. Words like exorcists, black magic, celebrities, and politicians immediately signal drama and mystery, so you already feel like you're about to hear something really intense. As for the thumbnails and titles, they make each episode feel like an action event. And another big strategy is using recurring guests, and in this case, Christian Valerio. And whenever he comes back, it turns into like a mini series, and people click instantly because they feel like they're continuing something that they left off previously. However, what's important is that the show doesn't really rely on just YouTube discovery. I actually found it through Facebook Reels. Yeah, I know Facebook, haha, really old. Um, which shows they're using, however, this shows which shows they're using short form clips as a funnel, and they start with the dramatic moment being posted as a reel, which ultimately grabs your attention, and then it pushes you towards the full episode. In the end, this is a smart loop because these short clips create suspense and curiosity, and then this funnels you to the long episodes that deliver the full story. As for reception, I would say they're quite a popular podcast, especially for a Spanish podcast, and we could see this through their likes and comments and engagement, likes, comments, and views on their YouTube. And so with these three episodes, they range between 500,000 views to 800,000 views. And the most viewed clip, podcast video, did 1.5 million views. So overall, they are very successful, and it's something we could learn from. So let's dive into the narrative structure. This podcast is not a self contained narrative series like a documentary where you have to listen in order to understand what's happening. Most episodes can actually stand alone because they're built around a topic or a guest and not one ongoing storyline from beginning to an end. But in this case, these three episodes still feel interconnected because they share the same guest, and the conversation keeps moving into deeper territory each time. So instead of a plot, the connection comes from progression. Episode 1 builds with trust and background. Episode two widens the scope with bigger claims, and episode 3 pushes into the most extreme and taboo themes. In the end, this creates a mini arc where you feel like you're going into further into the same world with the same person, even though each episode is technically its own separate topic. So let's get started on our first episode. Episode 1 is from Exorcist to Santeria Priest. And I see this as a foundational episode because it introduces Christian Valerio as a person with a backstory and a specific worldview, not someone just making random claims. And the focus is less on one shocking moment and more on building a profile, who he is, what experience he's had, and says he's had, and why people seek him out. To me, this matters because the podcast needs the audience to feel like the guest has credibility before they follow him into more controversial territory. And what keeps you listening is that the host guides the conversation from general background to more specific stories, so it feels like you're moving forward and learning who the guest is. So let's talk about a little bit about episode 2. Episode 2 is Black Magic for Success, Celebrities, Santeria, and Love Spells. This one shifts the hook from who Christian Valerio is to what does he know. And the celebrity angle is a huge attention move because it connects spiritual claims to fame, power, jealousy, and competitions. Really things that people already care about. Ultimately, this episode keeps you listening by framing information like a reveal. First, it makes broad claims. Then, it moves into specific examples, and then the idea that this world is bigger than one story. And even though you're skeptical, it's structured to keep you curious about what is coming next. So let's dive into a little bit about episode 3, which is Artists and Politicians Come to Me. And this is the peak of the mini arc. At this point, the show doesn't need really an introduction at all because these episodes 1 and 2 that I've analyzed already built trust and curiosity. So this episode could move straight into the most extreme and taboo territory. And what keeps you listening here is the sense of taboo. Like, this is not something people openly talk about, as well as keeping this careful, serious tone. And the pacing slows down around the most intense claims, which builds tension and makes the episode feel heavier and more serious than the earlier ones. So let's dive into editing, music, and takeaways. Now, editing, even in long form interviews, editing matters because it controls the attention. And these episodes are long, so editing for momentum is a big deal. Without editing, long conversations can feel repetitive or unfocused. And editing helps trim dead space as well, tightens sections that drag on, and shapes the conversation to clear chapters, just so it feels intentional instead of just random rambling. Editing also helps create peaks, which in this show is built around moments that are meant for revealing intense moments. So structure usually builds towards these moments and places them where they hit the hardest. Another aspect is music and atmosphere, which play a huge role. In this kind of show, music works like punctuation. It sets the mood right away, signals transition, and highlights moments that are meant to feel really important. It's not just decoration, it's part how the show creates a consistent paranormal atmosphere. And another key takeaway from this is what from the question is, would I use this podcast as a model? I would absolutely use this podcast as a model if I wanted to create a podcast had that was suspense based, a long form podcast built around strong tones and recurring guests. But if I wanted a short, heavily academic podcast, I wouldn't necessarily use this as a model because it relies more on atmosphere, storytelling, and escalation, which can be really time consuming. Overall, these 3 episodes show how po- paranormal podcasts keep listeners engaged through credibility, rising intensity, and a consistent investigative mood. Thank you for watching.